Welcome everyone to Marvel Hub. This is DK Dynamite, and today we're going to be talking about how Spider-Man Far From Home makes sense, how it fits in with Phase 3, how it could take place 5 minutes after Avengers Endgame, and it's some really important information that I think you guys will really want to actually listen to, because a lot of people are confused right now with how, after a Time Year 5 skip, Peter could somehow still be in high school with the same people that he was in high school with before the events of Avengers Infinity War. So let's make things really clear as to where Peter was going on that school bus during the little field trip he was going on during the events of Avengers Infinity War. So as he was on that school bus, he made it clear to Tony, right when he met up with him to fight Corvus Glaive, that he was on a field trip to MoMA, which is actually the Museum of Modern Art in Manhattan. Now, people are suggesting that he was actually coming back from the trip he went to throughout Spider-Man Far From Home, which to me is a plausible theory at best. Can definitely make sense that they retconned that point of dialogue where Peter tells Tony that he was going to the Museum of Modern Art. That could definitely work if they retcon that, but at this point I don't think they're going to retcon that, and it also would be quite weird to say that Peter went on this massive journey by himself without the help or without the aid or without the communication directly with Tony throughout Far From Home. Unless Tony somehow makes a cameo appearance in the movie, I don't think that's very likely. And the way that the first trailer for Far From Home kind of portrayed Peter was that he was almost tired of being Spider-Man after the events of Avengers Endgame. He was kind of putting it away for a little bit while he lives a normal life, while he talks to MJ, while he goes on a field trip with his school. It really, gives off that vibe that Peter needs a break. And the way he looks at his suit that Stark made him also gave off the interpretation that he must be depressed, he must be feeling down about something, and now we know what he's feeling down about now that we've seen Endgame. But in terms of that taking place before even Infinity War, I just don't think that would work. Happy himself in the trailer even says you're all alone. You're all alone. We know what that means now. It's a bit sad to talk about, but now we understand what actually happens in Endgame and how that affects Peter. So for the first trailer to really misdirect us into thinking that it's after Endgame when it's really not, for it to do that would kind of be a slap in the face for everything they've talked about in regards to this movie. Amy Pascal, Kevin Feige, they've all said that Spider-Man Far From Home takes place 5 minutes after Avengers Endgame. So be aware there will be spoilers in this video in regards to Avengers Endgame that we're about to go into, so please click off if you don't want to hear it. So the way that it would work is that it takes place 5 minutes after Tony Stark's funeral. So in terms of how that would happen and how that would work, the movie could easily start off just minutes after the funeral as Peter's walking away from the funeral itself, walking away with Aunt May, talking about how upset he is, talking about what his plans are now. The movie could easily go into that and then maybe time skip, a month later or a few weeks later, but the beginning of the movie itself would start just minutes after Endgame. Unless they've gone through reshoots, unless they've gone through, some massive rewrites in the script, then I don't think they're going to go against that plan. I do think that what they've told us about the movie is still accurate, but in terms of that theory that the movie could somehow work before Avengers Infinity War or before Avengers Endgame, it just really doesn't line up with what we already know about the timeline of events from after Spider-Man Homecoming to into Avengers Infinity War. It just doesn't work unless they retcon, unless they go against what they've said, unless they misdirected us with this trailer. And the other thing that people are talking about is how Peter could somehow still be in high school with the same group of people. The answer is very simple, and I'm sure they'll come out and say this very soon, but the answer is that everybody in Peter's class must have got snapped. Now, obviously, the chances of that happening sound pretty ridiculous, sound pretty awkward when you think about it, but I really do think that's what we're talking about here. I think it paves the way for some funny one-liners throughout the movie where teachers are kind of telling their students, hey, you know what, don't use the excuse that you've been dusted for 5 years to not do your assignment. You still have homework due tomorrow. So I think it'll be a funny joke throughout the movie, but the movie will probably emotionally emphasize the fact that the world is still recovering from a decimation, recovering from the 5-year period of hell where half the world was missing while the remaining half of the world was dealing with a crashing economy, a limited police force, more crime. The movie's definitely going to emphasize that, and I think the reason why the year on Peter's passport in Far From Home was kind of blacked out and covered was because it was hiding the fact that the movie does take place 5 years after the events of Avengers Infinity War. So that would place it in what, 2022, 2023ish, depending on when exactly Infinity War happened, depending on if the movie exactly took place in 2018. So that's why the year was covered on Peter's passport. Then there was no reason to even cover the year itself if the movie took place before Avengers Infinity War. There was no reason to do that, but I think the reason why Kevin Feige, Amy Pascal, and all the producers for Spider-Man have been quiet about that is, of course, to kind of hide the fact that the movie will be definitely emphasizing the world post-Decimation and kind of emphasizing that the MCU will never be the same, in the sense that a lot of bad shit happened during that 5-year period, which could pave the way for future spin-offs and future MCU movies, maybe even a Disney Plus show, just to show how crazy the world was during that 5-year period where, once again, half the world was missing. But I also think it's important to point out that the fact that Kevin Feige said Spider-Man Far From Home is the ending of Phase 3 versus Endgame being the ending of Phase 3 in the Infinity Saga is that the movie will not only go in depth with Spider-Man's character, MJ, some of these villains, Mysterio, and the Spider-Man narrative, but it'll also really have an emphasis and really put a focus on the world post-Decimation, which is something that Avengers Endgame didn't get to do all that much. It kind of went in depth with the time skip itself and the world before the people are brought back, which to me is good storytelling, but I think the movie definitely needed a little bit of depth with how the world recovered afterwards, how people were returned to where they were previously left, before the decimation, how that really works, because people are pointing out that people have to have died even when they didn't get snapped. If people were, flying a plane, if they were a pilot, if they were, a driver, even an Uber driver, if they were some type of important role when it comes to vehicles and they got snapped, obviously that killed the passengers in that vehicle. So how would reversing the snap bring a lot of those people back? Does it still mean that people definitely died? There were still casualties because of the decimation, and even if you brought those people back who were snapped, does it still leave those other people who died as a result of the snap? Does it still leave them behind? So definitely a lot of questions that were raised from the end of Endgame, which I'm sure can easily be explored in Spider-Man Far From Home through a couple of lines of dialogue, a couple of news reports. We're definitely going to see stuff in this movie that is dealing heavily with the decimation, and that's probably why the second trailer for Spider-Man Far From Home was delayed, because it definitely contains spoilers for Endgame. It definitely goes in depth with how the world recovers, so that's why it makes sense for Spider-Man Far From Home to be the true ending of Phase 3, to be the true ending of the Infinity Saga, since even though it doesn't deal with Infinity Stones and Avengers, it still shows how the world was impacted by the ending of Avengers Endgame before we go into Phase 4, which is going to be dealing a lot with the galaxy and other new heroes, the Eternals, a Black Widow prequel apparently. Those movies will definitely be serving a different purpose, building towards a different and bigger narrative that almost has nothing to do with the Infinity Saga itself. But that's about it. This is my DK Dynamite. I just wanted to go in depth with how Spider-Man Far From Home fits in with the ending of Avengers Endgame. It may not make sense to most people, but I think the storyline they're really going with is that most of, if not all of, Peter's classmates got snapped in decimation. Maybe not his teachers, maybe not some of the faculty in his school that we might see a little bit aged throughout Spider-Man Far From Home, but for the people that we're all familiar with, like Ned and MJ, they all got snapped along with Peter, so they all returned to the world 5 years after they left, into thinking that they were only gone for a few seconds when in reality it was actually years. So maybe some people that they knew are definitely in college now, maybe something bad happened to them. And I'll definitely explore that in the movie, but in terms of Peter and the classmates we all know, it does seem like they're going with the fact that they all suffered the same fate at the end of Avengers Infinity War. But be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, turn notifications on to stay updated with latest and greatest Marvel news and information, and peace out, everyone.